Conversations with the inspiring minds, using design and creativity towards social change. This is Design for the People with Greg Bunbury.
Hello and welcome to Design for the People. I'm your host, Greg Bunbury, and on this show, I'll be speaking to the designers, artists, creative thinkers, and activists using their skills to tackle social issues, uplift communities, and make a difference in the world. Joining me on today's show is Kenneth Bailey. Kenneth is the sector organizing and strategy lead and co-founder of the Design Studio for Social Intervention, also known as DS4SI. His interests focus on the research and development of design tools for marginalized communities to address complex social issues. With over 3 decades of experience in community practice, Bailey brings a unique perspective on the ethics of design in relation to community engagement, the arts, and cultural action. In 2020, Kenneth, alongside Lori Lobenstine and Ayako Maruyama, published a book called Ideas, Arrangements, Effects. The simple premise being ideas are embedded in social arrangements, which in turn produce effects. Kenneth, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that you agreed to be on. Your work's been a huge inspiration to me, and I look forward to our conversation. Just to kick off, for those tuning in, this has been the week of President Biden's inauguration in the US. So what's the general mood been like over there?
Well, I think there's a lot of both just immediate relief that there has been a shift from the Trump regime and a lot of sort of waiting to need to get to work again around the fact that we're in a cultural code civil war. It's like the surfacing of the fact that we really made a cultural shift in the zeitgeist with the situation that happened before the inauguration that really signified that we're in a kind of cultural civil war. And then the Biden inauguration has been a kind of reprieve from, or a kind of, I feel like a kind of intermission from the work that has to do to deal with the reality that the Civil War is still here. I think, it's a lot for people to really deal with sort of socially and emotionally on top of COVID. And so I think right now you just have a sort of a mood of a kind of releasing, although it's a release that's aware of the fact that you've got to run up a much bigger hill now. So
there's a lot to do.
It's like if you're running a marathon, you see that you get to go down the slope a little bit, and your legs get to you feel like your legs get to relax, but you can also see the next leg.
There's a hill coming.
And it's not a hill, you know what I mean? It's going to feel like you're running a marathon and suddenly you've kicked into a whole nother exercise and it feels like you're excavating a rock and then you don't see where your feet will be.
I hear that. Well, we will look forward to the changes to come. For those tuning in, I had the opportunity to join Kenneth on a panel hosted by the Design Council last year. And as part of that process, I got into your book, Ideas, Arrangements, and Effects, which has been so impactful to my work and just how I look at design. But before we get into the book, can we talk about your early career and journey to DS4SI?
Yes, and I'd love for you and I to figure out how to maybe co-host something with the Design Council as well, talking to other designers. Like I know speculative design is big in the UK, and I'd love to hear like how you guys are thinking about Afrofuturism. So I'd love to figure out how you and I could convince those guys to let us do maybe a collaboration with Riverside FM to interview more strategic designers and different design worlds over there.
I think that would be great.
That would be so much fun. But I started the studio after a career of really doing a body of work called management consulting in the nonprofit sector here in the United States. And I mostly supported the what we call executive directors. So people who run, I think what you call them in the UK are non-governmental organizations. We call them nonprofit organizations.
Right.
And I really hoped, I had a practice that really looked at interorganizational conflict and how to use interorganizational conflict as a way to engage in systems change, and also did a lot of consulting in placemaking and community development. And it was there that I really started to find this larger problem around a crisis of imagination and people who care about the world. Like, we had a very sort of enclosed sense of how change is made and where change is possible that sort of limits, it makes it impossible or unintelligible to see the ways in which the built environment, culture, arrangements, like we talk about in the book, actually are part of the infrastructure that keeps problems intact. And if we want to change problems, we have to make those things intelligible and actually try to change them as much as we are trying to add new programs or add new solutions to social problems. So, and how I really got into the studio was after I'd been consulting in sort of the organizational development management consulting world for about 5 years, and decided I wanted to figure out how to consult in a way that was more about changing how we think about social change. And I got a residency at a school here called the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. Inside of the Department of Urban Studies and Planning, with a professor named Cesar McDowell, inside of a program he was running that comes out of the work that another professor at MIT, Mel King, ran, called the Community Fellows Program. And when Cesar took it over, it was called the Center for Reflective Community Practice, and now it's called MIT CoLab. And when I was there, the question I was asking was a question around how to increase the imaginative capacity of people who care about social change. And it just so happens that I was there at the same time with a person who comes out of the design world. One of the things I learned from him is what I was talking about is actually a whole methodology, particularly in the sort of corporate sector, and it's called design. Before that, I really thought about design more as a identity, not a set of techniques, or a process of facilitation. I thought about design as like, the guy who makes an incredible building, or the person who makes jeans, or so I thought about it more like an identity. And then it was at MIT that I figured out, or I learned by going and hanging out inside of studios, because they have so many studios inside of MIT, particularly in the media studies arm and in the inside of Media Lab, that I learned that design, like the work I had already been doing in organizational development and management consulting, is very technique driven. And is a lot of facilitation, as well as, the sort of identity based design. It's not like that's not true. It's just that it's not the only thing that's true. And I already had a background in techniques and in methodologies and could speak that language very well. So stepping into another container around techniques and methodologies was very comfortable for me. And I could see where the techniques of design needed to be rethought to make them relevant for thinking about social situations as much as they had been designed to think about products and interaction. So we embarked upon trying to design a set of techniques that make sense for the civil society sector, or the social change sector, or nonprofits, however you want to put it. And that's how it started.
So what was the driver that pulled you into this work? Were you just naturally interested in people and dynamics and relationships, or was it something that evolved from other work you were doing?
I started doing social change work very, very, very young, like at 12. I'd
Oh
already
wow.
started doing a body of work in the United States. I don't know if you all have what we call community organizing in the UK.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so I started doing grassroots organizing in the United States in St. Louis at 12, and knew that my work would kind of stay. I mean, I didn't have this language then. It was more like I was interested in staying in the realm of change, politics, and the like. I think, I'm sure I had, you're 12. So between 12 and becoming an adult, you probably change your minds 1,000 times. I'm sure there was a time I wanted to be other things, but I always had this kind of social justice, social change bent as a young person. So that just became more evolved and more mature as I got more and more opportunities. And by the time I was like 22, 23, I got my first opportunity to really engage in this world of methodology and techniques and training and consulting as a student organizer with an organization called Campus Outreach Opportunity League. And that was where I really started to get immersed in technique development workshops, and learning that there's a whole world where you sort of crunch concepts and knowledge into packages that make them more accessible to populations. And developing that was something that once I learned about it, I was very, very drawn to, and really hung around people from my 20s upwards that made it their life's work to do that kind of thing, to develop techniques, to develop methods, either in sort of qualitative research or in training and pedagogy. I really found a home with those kind of people. It's really funny because it's such a arcane world, and unless you're in it, you don't know that it exists, and there aren't very many codified ways to step into that practice. So
Yeah,
it's
I
a
completely
it's a
appreciate
strange
that.
world.
I think with a lot of disciplines around design and design thinking, like service design and UX, these are terms that didn't really exist once upon a time. And it wasn't really a methodology for how we processed relationships or how we processed dynamics or how we processed culture or dealing with culture. So the idea that, you're basically setting a pathway that is now so well established that others can follow you, which is that's pretty incredible.
Yeah. Thank you. I remember when we first started working on a studio, we were very influenced by Bruce Mau's book, Massive Change. And I was like, this is it. Like, this is where I have to be. Like, I need to be sort of making this kind of work relevant for the communities I care about. And, hopefully we've been able to make some small contribution to this discourse.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think you already have. And for me, what makes it so impactful is this idea of moving design or creative thinking beyond output driven. So rather than looking at the thing that's made, looking at the systems by which it is made, looking at the methodology by which it is made, looking at the conditions by which it is made. And I think that's so empowering for designers, because we have, especially the way it's taught in the UK, we have such a myopic view of design as being this service. So it's something that's done for clients or agencies or an employer. And the goal is whatever you're making. If you make a website, the goal is the website. If you make a flyer, the goal is the flyer. But we're never really looking at the conditions by which it's made and, examining the users, how they interface with it, what the transformation actually is. So just kind of having this holistic view of design and problem solving is so empowering. With that being said, can you give us an overview of ideas, arrangements, effects?
I'll try. So the premise is that most of the time when we're trying to solve problems, we see the problem in a kind of of a enclosed vacuum and individuate the problem. We will make the problem a person, or we'll make the problem the specific thing we see. Like, for example, childhood obesity. I don't know if that was a situation that you all struggled with in the UK, but it was a big problem here. I mean,
It's a big problem here
it was
still.
it was discussed as a big problem in the United States. And instead of talking about the arrangements that produce childhood obesity, they would talk about the children themselves and about making the children lose weight, or weighing children, or blaming the parents.
Right.
And the book we're saying is that where you see a social problem, look for the arrangements around that social problem. And the arrangements are the hard and soft conditions that shape the space and time where you see the problem sort of evidencing itself. And once you go up and look at those concrete and sort of abstract things surrounding the problem, search for the ideas embedded in those concrete things. And if you can figure that out, you can actually change another layer up from the evidencing of the problem and potentially have a deeper impact. So around childhood obesity, we really sort of critiqued the models of blaming children and blaming families. And we were more interested in either tackling or imagining new social arrangements that we think could actually do a deeper dive into the problem. So for us, instead of weighing children, we proposed a project called Public Kitchen, where we said if kitchens were made part of public infrastructure the way schools are and libraries are, and they were that ubiquitous, and people could engage in collective whole conversations, practices, ways of thinking about and dealing with food, and that was sort of part of our everyday lives, how would that then change social life? And if we could change social life, how would that then impact the lives of families and then impact the lives of children? So we try to move further, deeper into the intricacies of systems and try to make change there, to have that change then change everything, and hopefully have the kind of results we want. We say if you try to make change too close to where the problem evidences itself, in fact, you can reify the problem. You can make the problem worse. So it kind of gets to another sort of concrete example of that would be another one with children is when you see children in public schools, or I don't know if this is another one that's big in the United States, where children will get diagnosed with ADHD because they can't sit still inside of school rooms. The child will get the solution, which is a medical solution, versus looking at the room and saying, what is it about this room that is making it impossible for the child to sit still? The problem becomes the child. The problem doesn't become the situation that the child is in. And mostly that's because, you see everybody else or the other people adhering to the situation. But it doesn't necessarily mean that because you see them adhering to the situation, that the situation is actually good for them. And so instead of seeing the person evidencing a problem as a problem, what if we saw the person evidencing a situation as an opportunity for us to learn about the situation and to actually think and evaluate and figure out how to make the situations better? And for us, the situation would be the chairs, the teacher, the chalkboard, the time that you're asking people to sit still, the fact that you're asking people to sit at all of those things, the cultural norms that are implicit in that situation. So the being quiet, not talking to your neighbors, all of that we call arrangements, social arrangements. And we call them hard and soft. And we say, if we want to make a world more just and more interesting, really, and more culturally complex, we have to understand how to identify these arrangements and how to identify what the arrangements are doing to produce the effects we don't want, and what are the ideas embedded in those arrangements. And so that's where the framework really comes from. And we got to that sort of haphazardly through designing and looking at our design techniques and working. And then at some point around 8-9 years into our own practice, we were like, ideas, arrangements, effects. It just sort of came to us.
That's amazing. I think it's so important in terms of how we think about problem solving, how we think about design thinking. I know there's a lot of designers and creatives who listen to this podcast, and I think we all suffer from, at times, trying to solve effects with effects.
That's the problem.
Rather than looking at what underpins it, we're trying to deal with the manifestation of it with other manifestations.
Exactly.
How do DS4SI go about finding your projects? So when you're looking for projects to undertake, or these social interventions, as you call them, what does that process look like?
Well, it's sort of two-pronged. We are constantly running workshops to meet new clients and have clients understand how we think, and hopefully, get clients in the door. And then once we get a client, we like to keep clients for a while. A lot of clients come through us through text or books or like writing. And a lot of clients come through us through other consultants or other outfits who are like, oh, you guys are thinking about assistance transformation. You should go look at these guys. And then we also get bodies of work through the philanthropic sector. We have a sort of private philanthropy sector in the United States. And so sometimes foundations or other non-government organizations or nonprofit organizations will want to collaborate with us for a period of time. And in that work, that work will get funded through foundations, and that'll become part of our budget. So there's a body of going out and getting clients, and then there's a body of collaborating and getting grants. And that's really, it's the combination of those two that make the studio exist. And where we're trying to go now is to expand both our philanthropy and client base and build out a more sort of public-facing production phase of the studio as well, to put our ideas more out into the public sphere.
So how do you go about measuring the efficacy of the work you do? So if we're talking about a social intervention, we're talking about you being in the community. What are your processes for measuring how effective or how much engagement these projects generate?
I think that's the next big thing we want to take on, is bringing on a person. I think we're now at a place where we can actually get someone in to go back and do a deep dive and sort of do research and really start to evaluate what's been the effect of the studio. I think we spent so much time, like the past 10 years, like up to writing the book, I think we spent most of our time trying to actually say what it is we're trying to say. And now we're just at a point where we can actually look back and start to evaluate. And hopefully with this new hire and now that we have a book out that's actually sort of has a premise that we can go back and actually test, we're at a place to really do a deep evaluation.
When you're in the communities and you're doing these projects and you're delivering them and you're seeing a transformation, do you see that happening with the participants and the people the interactions are aimed at?
Yes. And the goal was to really see it happening with the people who are trying to create change. So, our initial premise was, how do we increase the capacity of change makers so that change makers, if they want to change something like horizontal violence with young people, they don't just look to legislators or jobs to do it. They recognize that there are ways that they can do that culturally, and trying to get that to stick. And so I feel like that's why we have to sort of expand our outward facing work even more, is the difficulty that it takes to get the ways that we're thinking to stick within the institutions that we collaborate with, and really changing the way those organizations think and the way those organizations approach problems. And increasing the capacity of people who are dealing with problems to think about problems differently as well. And that's happened to some extent. Again, we need to evaluate that even more. But I feel like I would love to figure out how to have our understandings of how change works stick more inside the systems we collaborate with.
I think for me, our knee-jerk reaction to solving very complex societal issues, so something that was in the press a lot, or has been in the press a lot here in the UK, is quote-unquote black-on-black violence, or knife crime, as it's commonly referred to. And the solutions around this problem tend to be solutions that are based on criminality. And they're solutions that are based on who has a knife and what happens to the person if they're caught with a knife. And that's how, or less knives. Let's have less knives in the community and that will solve the problem. Rather than looking at the structure that underpins why black men see each other, or young black men see each other, as a threat and feel the need to protect themselves, or feel the need to carry weapons in the first place. And what about our system is creating that dynamic?
Right.
So I think,
right.
yeah.
And so much of what, we're trying to do is to say, it doesn't like that. What you were saying is like you're drawing a arbitrary circle around a very narrow aspect of a larger relational problem. And you're thinking that if you can stop knife or stop man, you stop problem. But problem exists beyond knife and man. Problem exists across, a network of people who have an agreement about a way of interacting, and that way of interacting needs to be reconsidered. If we're thinking about rethinking interaction, we have to look at the idea undergirding, or the belief in that situation undergirding the interaction, and figure out how to not problematize it, but at least disturb it, like start to interfere with it in different ways. So,
or even just have people question it.
Exactly.
Just to have people question it.
Question. Exactly.
Yeah, because it's something that I had throughout my teenage years, and as a young man, the arrangement was, if you're walking down the street and someone stared at you hard, that meant they wanted to fight, and you would
even
just
in the
fight.
UK.
Oh, so much in the UK.
I wouldn't have guessed that same. I keep learning that a lot of the things that we figured out have so much resonance across so many different geographies. I almost feel like now the next 10 years would be like, what if we could take all the people who found resonance with the things we've learned and do a completely different deep dive that's harder? Like, so, and it's so, yeah, I get excited about the prospects of that.
That's what I mean. There's so much in a book that has so much resonance, not just in terms of design, not just in terms of professionally, but just in terms of how we view the world. I remember there was a real moment in my teenage years where I made a conscious decision to stop seeing the people who lived in my neighborhood as immediate threats.
And for us, I think what we're trying to figure out, and it's still a question for us, is, are there ways we can design techniques that can actually make those kinds of decisions move from an individual to a population? What would it look like to say if all the black men in London were suddenly like, yeah, that was 2020, now it's 2021, that's dead. Like what would need to happen in the cultural zeitgeist to make that happen? So those are the questions we're really interested in figuring out. And how do we design for that?
As individual designers and creators, what would your advice be for people who want to progress their typical ideas of design and creativity being output driven into a more holistic approach and consider things like systems design?
My advice would be to surround yourself with people who are interested in it and run experiments. Like take things that you are interested in exploring and put some time into doing design research and actually getting feedback from your colleagues to try it on. And to get feedback not only from your colleagues, but people in other aspects of the design world that are also trying to move more into a systems framework around design. I think you just have to literally get it in your methodology by doing it and getting feedback on it and doing it again. And I think that's the way in, is to do it and get feedback on it with people who you trust won't be worried about your feelings. I mean, to some extent, you don't want people to be mean to you, but you also want people to help you go in the direction you want to go in.
Where can people find you, Kenneth? Where can they find your book?
Twitter, at DS4SI. You can find the book on our website. You can Google Design Studio for Social Intervention, or you could Google DS4SI.org. And there you'll be able to find access to the book, Ideas, Arrangements, Effects. And we also are on Facebook at DS4SI. So we're easy to find.
Awesome. All right. I highly recommend that anybody watching this go and check out that book. It's life-changing stuff. My thanks to Kenneth for joining me today. Just your time and your expertise has been so inspirational. Thank you so much. And, I hope we get to work together again soon in the future.
We should see if we can get Design Council to do a from object to systems design set of conversations with us and designers of color.
That would be amazing.
And again, Greg, you're the man. I like you so much. I can't wait to continue to have this conversation with you. So thanks so much for thinking of me.
Excellent. Thanks so much, man.
You got it.
You've been listening to Design for the People with Greg Bunbury.